is, what it was, what it shall be. We're back again. Today's video is called Spiritwar Bootcamp number 91, and this one's called Pre-Programming the Files. How's everyone doing? I'm doing so great. So, before I start, I would like to give a big thanks to dozens and dozens of people who've brought me along this path, who've taught me how to research, how to think, how to connect dots, and there's way too many to name. But this particular video really was inspired by the new video that just dropped from Mind Unveiled, which is an amazing channel. They have incredible editing skills. They make really long format videos that go deep in depth and a lot of source material to back up their ideas. So this video, like I said, pre-programming the files. So everyone's on the files. You can't get away from the files. All social media is just files, files, files all day long. But what I wanted to focus on today is how the prediction of this goes back decades. Okay, there's a lot of predictive elements of this whole situation in the Illuminatus trilogy, which I've referenced before, which I think was published, I'm not sure, maybe early 80s, I think, something like that. And of course, Robert Anton Wilson was working for CIA front publication, which is called Playboy magazine, right? And he's an excellent writer, don't get me wrong, but he's involved with a lot of the cults. He's definitely pretty pro Crowley, pro sex cult, pro mind control drugs and stuff like that. And he talks about it, you know, he has his own little invention called Operation Mindfuck, which is pretty much, I mean, you could argue that he's describing the CIA protocols, but I think he was active participant in that. And, you know, of course, all the sexual stuff too. But that's not the main focus of this video. So what I want to talk about today mainly is this show called Lost. And anyone who watched that series, in my opinion, one of the best TV series of all time. But as I've said many times before in videos, the media is the primary arm of all the intelligence agencies, and that's how they steer the culture. And they disclose their ops, like they disclose, you know, current day ongoing ops in their TV shows and series all the time. For one, it's a way to communicate. It's a way to pre-program and precondition the masses for the inevitable planned exposure of everything at a certain time frame, you know. And like I said, it's for training and communicating with their agents worldwide in a public way that everyone knows to look at. And especially if you know something with this series being directed by J.J. Abrams, right, known CIA collaborator. And a lot, you know, when you want to find a CIA heavy collaborator in Hollywood, just look for somebody who's making movies about space, right? Like Star Trek? I forget, Into Darkness or something like that. His Star Trek movies were, in my opinion, the best of them. But, you know, and then he does this show called Lost, which is about a mysterious island that's carrying on a lot of genetic experimentation and mind control shit. So that may seem relevant to people right now, and there's a good reason behind that. So for those that haven't seen the show series Lost, it revolves around this mysterious group called the Dharma Initiative, which in my opinion is just code for DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. DARPA is encoded into the series as Dharma, the Dharma Initiative. So they take people from certain types of disciplines, going all the way from like cooks and mechanics to all the way up to fertility doctors, which is the thing that we want to focus on today, because this is going to tie in with the files and all that. A lot of people have underemphasized the fact of Epstein's involvement with genetic research and AI, and just research in general. Like, it's rarely discussed. Everyone wants to focus on the sex angle, which is relevant, obviously, and the geopolitics. But today we're going to mainly focus on the genetic component of it. So in this series Lost, directed by a CIA collaborator, J.J. Abrams, who just happens to have the same initials as James Jesus Angleton. We won't go into that. That's just a funny thing that I thought of. But so Dharma/DARPA, right? They have this mysterious island that seems to move around so no one can really find it. And everything's top secret. And they got technologies going on. They got people, a lot of J's in the show. You got Jack, the main character. You got all these Jacks, James, Jacob, John, you know, all the J's. And of course, Jack, James, and Jacob are all the same name, really. James is just the Scottish version of it. But so we see open mind control reference in the show. There's one scene where they have to break out this kid who's in a room some psychic driving type stuff going on. He's all wired up, and he's being forcibly subjected to this repetitive conditioning through video stimuli, video and audio on repeat, and he's locked, kind of, Clockwork Orange style. He's like locked in place and like forced to be constantly bombarded with all this programming, right? And again, it's about breeding. Like, one of the most dominant themes of the show is this big statue that gets revealed at the end. It's a giant, half human, half alligator giant statue, which is an Egyptian goddess called Taweret or Tawert, right? And so she's the goddess of childbirth, right? And so probably one of the main 2 or 3 main characters is this female who's a fertility doctor, right? And so you'd be like, why are they having to have this high specialization fertility doctor? And they go into a lot of detail in the show about her recruitment process and how they're working for this. And interestingly, one of the main characters in the show too is this mysterious scientist dude who seems to be immortal, right? There's a lot of time shifting in the show. And so also this goes into Jeffrey Epstein, very interested in time travel and genetics, right? And of course, the mysterious island that no one knows about. That's really a military operation, right? For genetics, breeding, blackmail, and so on. And arguably all the same things could be said about the show. Like, it becomes disclosed that they are watching all the participants who are supposedly randomly on this plane that crashes onto the island, right? But in reality, they've all been tracked and traced their whole life. And this mysterious time jumper called Jacob, who seems to also be some kind of immortal, who has time displacement technology, is like showing up. He never ages in the course of the show, even if it goes over decades. Like, he just pops in and shows up, and he's got this lighthouse where he's like watching the lives of everyone, and there's this big dial they show with everyone's names written on it. So he turns the looking glass, lighthouse, to focus on these different people at different times and observe them, and more or less, monitor them, gang stalk them, and so on, and show up at critical junctures in their life, these inflection points, to just subtly nudge them in the proper direction that they're supposed to be going in. And so then you have this fertility doctor who gets recruited by this guy who's called, I'm trying to remember his name, Richard Alpert, okay, which is the real life name of the so-called Ram Dass, another one of these CIA mind control LSD guru dudes that was best friends with, Timothy Leary and Neem Karoli Baba and of course, all these CIA types that are trying to mind control the masses under the guise of spirituality. Just the exact same thing that's been going on 100 years before that, dude, and up to now, current day. They still use the same MO for everything, and we're going to get into that with the genetics as well. But what I want to focus on is this mysterious DARPA/Dharma island, right, with all their submarines and their boats and stuff. These all figure prominently. Interestingly, they have a sacrificial figure in the show called Charlie, right, who gets shot in the throat. And a lot of the plot of the show revolves around this woman, Claire, and she meets with all these psychics who tell her that it's very important that she be the one to raise her baby, because apparently they're getting some kind of prefiguration that they know that someone's going to try to abduct her baby, and that there's some big complications with the baby. And she becomes best friends with this female fertility doctor, just happens to be showing up on the island with them. And so what Mind Unveiled put in his video today, he was talking a lot about these topics dealing with fertility, how Epstein was connected into all these Harvard geneticists and all the, and of course, douchebag retards like Deepak Chopra and all these medical people. He was always consulting with them. He was trying to always influence the funding for these different agencies. And he was obsessed with genetics and fertility for both males and females. He was making clones. He was incubating babies. He openly talked about that. Even before the files came out, people were chattering about this and that, not knowing a lot of the details that have subsequently become publicized. But basically, it was an ongoing genetics operation because, of course, the man in question had a very low testosterone. Now, that's part of the files that's come out. He has low T, which often contributes to various types of mental illness and paradoxically violence and stuff like that. But he had low T, and of course, so-called chosen people tend to have a lot of genetic deformities. Out of any known population, they're the most inbred, first of all, because of their extreme racism of ever having to breed with the goyim is like the worst possible thing. It's like a defilement, despite the fact that the more so-called purebred they become, the more genetic deformities they have, which is, this is widely known. So maybe this is one of the reasons why good old J.E. was so obsessed with genetics, because he knew his genetics were super fucked up and that he was basically a mutant. And yet, despite all that, he felt like he was supposed to seed the race with his fucked up, mutated mental illness, low T DNA for some reason. And I kind of think this is a common thing with the elites. And of course, then you get into the whole homosexuality angle of the very rarely discussed homosexual relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Les Wexner and so on like that. And how this homosexual pedo grooming is the if you were to argue anything, is the complete crux of this whole Masonic B'nai B'rith cult worldwide, and stemming from earlier secret society cults like the Mithraic Order and all these different things like Skull and Bones. There's always homo pedo in there. That's like the as the Masons would say, that's the brick and mortar. Hate to be gross, but in Masonic things, they all explicitly refer to as the feces, right, as being the mortar, right? And like their little gavel and their little Masonic hammer, that's the genitals and stuff. It's super gross. But they create this whole languages to get into the whole deal why they're obsessed with homo pedo and serpent DNA, and how they want to inject all these serpent venoms and serpent DNA, because of course serpents have this crazy thing like alligators and stuff where they're hermaphroditic, and depending on environmental conditions it determines how, whether the eggs will become male or female, right? So they don't have gender in the sense that mammals do generally. And so that maybe this is part of why they're obsessed with all this transgenderism and hermaphroditism and, getting gay with Les Wexner all day long. and, so they have something weird going on with their DNA. And if you look back into history and read stuff about like the Merovingian dynasty and Melusine, and how they say about themselves that they're this Masonic, messianic bloodline that's a crossbreed hybrid between a mammalian humans of the Lusignan dynasty and crossbred with some kind of a reptilian aquatic sea monster. And maybe that's why they want to have so many submarines and go excavating and digging around all in between what's called Puerto Rico and Cuba in the Bimini Road off the coast of Florida. Why they're looking for the lost ruins of Atlantis, just like in Robert Anton Wilson's book and his Golden Yellow Submarine, where he's a sex cult and drug cult surfing around the world looking for Atlantis, just like Ghislaine Maxwell and the Terramar Foundation. And so it's odd that, you have the CIA connected, OSS connected people, Robert Anton Wilson and what's his name, Ian Fleming, and all these guys, and Epstein, really obsessed with all this and publishing it all in their books. You got Thunderball and the submarine, and you got of course Ian Fleming living out on Jamaica and Island, and of course look at James Bond if you want to find a sex cult. Like I could go into super depth about how James Bond is a Mithraic allegory for the Raven grade of initiation within the Mithraic order. And I could go on and on about all that, but today I just want to try to keep it kind of focused. But my point is to say that with the CIA and with these different intelligence assets, they're obsessed with perverted sex, they're obsessed with genetics, they're obsessed with this kind of reptilian human hybridization process for some reason, and transgender hermaphrodites and the Baphomet. Like, what is all that stuff really about, And people often tend to dismiss this as all like spiritual woo-woo or some kind of bizarre cult thing. But look how easily it blends in with the world of Harvard geneticists and genetic engineering and cloning. Like, the line between these cult spiritualities and science is non-existent. And in fact, most of the people that we credit with the foundations of modern scientific method, like Francis Bacon, was a Rosicrucian Freemason. And people like Isaac Newton, publishing more works on alchemy and biblical chronology than he ever wrote about his gravitational theories and optics. He was an occultist. Okay, same with Einstein, was a Kabbalist, and Richard Feynman was way into the Kabbalah and stuff like that. And that's why he has the fine structure constant 1/137, and of course 137 being the numerical sum of the word Kabbalah in ancient Hebrew. And I just could just go on and on about all that. But what I'm trying to do today is just show you, like, if you learn the decryption, if you learn the coding, these guys love nothing better than to disclose all their secrets through mass media. And that's what I'm trying to say about the show Lost, right? Where we have this fertility doctor, we got time control technology, time displacement technology, teleportation, we got time loops, we got, you know, all the bread and butter of this whole scenario. Hidden islands with submarines, sex cult, brainwashing. Okay, here's another interesting thing that I wanted to get into. Okay, so a lot of people don't talk about how Les Wexner had this big article. I think it was in Vanity Fair, one of these major elite, publication magazines, where he talks about his Dybbuk, right, which is the old Hebrew word for a demon that basically inhabits the host body and brings them power and prominence through financial machinations. And he says this all about himself. This isn't me making this up or coming out with some kind of malignant rumors about these people. This is what he says about himself, that this Orthodox Judaic term of the Dybbuk demon possessing him, right? And how would you transfer a Dybbuk demon in these secret societies? Oh, maybe it's through ritual sodomy, just like Les Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein were doing together, or just like, Roy Cohn and a certain famous president were doing together, or just like, all these Masonic initiations where they go in their Masonic underwear and pull their pants up and pull their shirt down and put a BDSM noose around their neck, right? Maybe they're kind of transferring stuff through this sexual act. Maybe they're transferring genetics. Maybe this is a vector to lower the human auric field of energy shield, so that some kind of energetic Dybbuk can somehow like inject itself, just like Les Wexner writes about in his famous article, where he talks about how he feels like he's being injected with pins and needles. And he can't rest, and he's got the spilkas all the time because this demon is injecting itself into his energy body. And maybe that's one reason behind all this kind of sexual depravity and sex abuse, is that it basically creates a hole in the human energy body and allows for the implantation, whether it be through spiritual means or through some kind of injections, injecting some kind of, I don't know, reptilian DNA into people, so that they can, become vectors for this, non-corporeal intelligence. And maybe this is why they're obsessed with all these wearables, why they want everyone to have wearables, and they want everyone to have a graphene oxide in their bloodstream and foreign DNA, and they want them to have constant surveillance by Palantir and Promise software. Maybe just like the Masons and the Illuminati were doing in the 1700s. Maybe they're trying to create a whole society and a whole race of Dybbuk AI demons, that the humans just become hackable, wearable wetware for this non-corporeal intelligence that can be transmitted through, I don't know, Palantir and Wi-Fi technology and 6G and so on like that. Maybe this is an ongoing thing. And maybe this is why, famous Freemason Benjamin Franklin, the Postmaster General of the United States, had his home in England excavated, and he was best friends with Elias Ashmole and the Hellfire Club, just like they're putting in Stranger Things. The Hellfire Club was a satanic group of these Masonic types like Benjamin Franklin, who had a underground cave system underneath West Wickham Estates, where they would do sex rituals underground. And maybe that's why Ben Franklin's house was excavated, and they found a bunch of dead baby skeletons, and they found a bunch of these weird things they call tetramas that Ben Franklin's good physician friend, has had all these deformed fetuses in jars, and maybe they were doing some kind of genetic manipulation, and they wanted to create a Dybbuk AI nation, a Freemasonic / Illuminati nation, to where they could have the whole government and the populace genetically engineered and modified so that they could have a Dybbuk AI system hacking the population. And maybe this is the real, so that's a lot to digest, right? But my point is to say, if you go back and look at all the fiction, right, and you look at all the works of these people and everything that they've said, they've been disclosing this the whole time. The big mistake I think people are making is that these elites somehow are resistant to disclosure, and they're fighting it, and they're trying to prevent the Epstein files from coming out. Well, that's just how you publicize it. That's how you make people want to obsess and read about it, and everybody download it, and everybody gossip about it and talk about it, because this is what Blavatsky and Annie Besant and these people would call revelation of the method and externalization of the hierarchy. right? So you're basically telling the whole world what you're doing, because this adds to the trauma. Because, you know, while at the same time, you know, trying to act like, oh, it's this big controversy, like, oh, everyone's fighting disclosure, and Pam Bondi and Kash Patel are trying to fight disclosure, and Dan Bongino is trying to block and cover up for all this. No, this is a stage play. They want to make it as dramatic as possible. They want to compel people to think that there's some kind of real dialectic going on, and that there's some good team versus bad team, good cop, bad cop going on. But that's not the case at all. They want to disclose this information. It's part of the trauma induction. It's part of the way that they it's in a way, it's like a power flex, because they're like, look, everybody's talking about it, everyone knows about it, no one's stopping it. No one's putting Elon Musk and his Neuralink in jail. No one's putting Palantir in jail. Nobody's putting Mark Zuckerberg metaverse, you know, death cult AI in jail. These guys are billionaires. They're still building islands and building underground fortresses for the, you know, for whatever is coming. And so they're not afraid, you know. Look at, I mean, how many videos are you going to find on Meta and YouTube today that it's all run by these same people? They got millions and millions of videos that coming out every day, not getting censored, you know. And it's not only the ones that are in there, you know, Mossad, like TPUSA circuit. It's not only them. It's a lot of so-called independent people putting stuff out. No one's censoring them. No one's stopping them. No one's going to jail. You know, they've co-opted us all into participating in their massive psyop. But our best bet, in my opinion, is to gain knowledge, to understand what's being done, to not look at it as some kind of mystical, mysterious, demonic thing. But this is a science. They're practicing science. They're not, I mean, they do get into all this ritualistic stuff, but that in itself is a form of science. There's a scientific method behind it. There's a time-tested, centuries-old cult hierarchy that's behind it, that's been going since the, you know, Babylon and prior. And they're doing the exact same tactics, techniques, and protocols. And to the extent that you're mystified by it and you think you're going to pray to somebody and they're going to help you and like all this and that, you know, that's where they want you. They want you in the realm of mystification. They want you to believe in Steven Spielberg's Disclosure, space aliens, and the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and that there's some kind of mysterious off-world beings that are doing all this to you, and that, you know, you're helpless and hopeless. But that's not the case. Any human has the capacity to just follow the breadcrumbs and understand what they're telling you, and, you know, to get ahead of the game, to see what's coming next. Because if they're putting this in the fiction from the 1980s, like the Illuminatus trilogy, they're putting it in Star Wars and Star Trek, and they're putting it in Lost TV series and Alias TV series, and they're putting it on all these shows, telling you right up front what's about to go on, you know. They're also telling you what's coming next. So this is the way to become educated. This is the way to become empowered through knowledge, and to not mistake their technocracy takeover for some kind of mystical alien invasion or some kind of black magic. It's science just as much as anything else, and you have to treat it as such, and you have to use rationality, logic, intuition, and all the above to basically decode and decipher what's going on, and to see how they're trying to play it and how they're trying to play you and where they want you in the equation. They want you in fear. They want you believing in some kind of mystical mumbo jumbo that only the high priest caste can really understand. But in reality, anyone can understand what genetics is. Anyone can understand genetic deformities and population genetics, and why certain groups of genetically deformed elites would want to suppress the goy, and why they would want to control all their breeding and program all their kids to be trannies and gender dysphoric and, you know, anemic and, you know, screen addicted and so on. It's a form of mind control, and it is science-based, and it is based on the scientific method. And so if you can begin to get your head around that and to follow the paper trail and use your innate God-given intellect to try and decipher what they're doing, you can opt out, and you can see that their whole empire is based on lies, delusions, illusions, and the illusion of power. And so once that's the case, then you can start to pull up your sleeves and do the real work that's involved to gain literacy in these matters, and to start participating in their game. Stop paying their 23andMe, stop paying for their metaverse, stop paying for their Netflix, Bad Bunny, Super Bowl AI propaganda of transgenderism. You know, and stop paying for their Jesuit education system that's, running this transgender psyop on everyone to sterilize and neutralize the population. You don't have to participate in that. You don't necessarily have to fight it, but you can opt out and recognize